and welcome to City Legal. This is our first meeting for 2022. I mean, how excitement is that? And it's a pleasure to be here. We're at the Sydney Mechanics School of Arts. The City Legal community is a ministry to the legal profession. Now, I was going to wing this introduction, but they've given me this wonderful line here: a group for those in the legal profession, sharp legal minds engaging with the bigger questions of life. That's us. How good is that? But no, seriously, we do meet together to consider the big questions in life. And we do that by looking at the Bible, by looking at God's word. If this is your first time at City Legal, can I extend to you a particularly warm welcome? It is fantastic to have you here, both either in the building or online. Our format is a 20-minute talk with a 20-minute Q&A. And during the course of the talk, we would encourage you to submit questions. Now, if you're here in person, you can do it via text to the text number that is on the outline that you've been given, or you can do it by way of good old pen and ink on the pieces of paper which are with your outline also. If you're online, you can either do it via the Slido, the link for which is in the chat function on the Zoom, or you can text it to the number which is also posted in the chat section. Your feedback is very important to us, and you can submit that feedback via the QR code. There's a QR code on the outline in the building, and there's also a QR code in the chat function on the Zoom. Our speaker today is Dr. Sam Chan, and he is going to talk to us about the great reboot. I mean, we've approached the beginning of 2022, lots of twos, as we all know from yesterday, in 2022, with great expectations. And for a lot of people, things really don't seem to have changed much. Our Lifeline, as I understand it, had their highest ever phone-in on New Year's Day. A friend of mine, a barrister, I bumped into him in the street on the 3rd of January and asked him how he was going. And he told me that he thought that his enthusiasm for the new year was starting to wane. The 3rd of January. Anyway, looking forward to hearing what Sam has to say. Our Bible reading for this morning comes from John's Gospel. It's John 11, verses 25 to 27. It's in the outline for those people who are in the room. And I'm going to read it, and then Sam's going to come up and speak to us. John 11, 25 to 27. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." Sam, thanks.
Well, the pandemic got us doing many strange things. The pandemic got us exercising. The pandemic got us making sourdough. And the pandemic got us even missing the office. Who would have thought we would miss working in the office? Because we missed the random conversations. We missed the coffee run, but there's one thing we did not miss, and that was the office photocopier. How bad is the office photocopier? It runs out of paper when it's your turn to use the machine. And when you try to print 10 copies, it prints 10,000 copies. And now you can't stop, and you try to stop. Oh, now you've done it. You've got the paper jam. There is nothing good about the paper jam. You have to open doors. You have to find the jam, unjam it. You get toner all over your shirt. You have to slam shut compartments. And then you hit the reboot button, hoping for a reboot. And maybe that's where we are right now, hoping for a reboot. Because the last year, 2021, felt like a paper jam year. It felt like just the year before, because we kicked off with bushfires just like the year before. And then we had floods just like the year before. And then we had another pandemic isolation lockdown just like the year before. It felt like a paper jam year. We were hoping for the reboot, but we didn't get a reboot. And maybe that's how we feel right now. We too want a reboot in life, but there's no guarantee there will be a reboot. But what if Jesus gives us the reboot that we're looking for? And if you know, you've heard me from last year. Last year, I used this photo to represent Jesus. Every year, I try to go to the internet and think, if Jesus came today, what would he look like? And I'm thinking, well, maybe he would look like this, because we know from the Bible, he was not Anglo. He liked to do his eating and drinking. He liked to go to parties. He was cutting edge, iconoclastic, countercultural. So maybe this is what he would have looked like if he was around today. And so the question today is this: how can I get the reboot I'm looking for? What if I can find it in the Jesus story? So g'day, once again, my name is Sam Chan. I'm with Third Space, City Legal, and we'll try to answer this question over the next 15 minutes, followed by some question and answer from you guys. So how can the Jesus story give me the reboot I'm looking for? Well, I'm going to suggest 3 ways. The first way is this. The Jesus story says, yep, last year was messed up. Now, when we follow sport, for sport to work, there has to be good guys and bad guys. That's just how sport works. So in rugby league, Queensland are the bad guys. In rugby union, the All Blacks are the bad guys. And in AFL, Collingwood are the bad guys. But something strange happened just 1 year ago when we had the cricket, when we had Australia versus India. Suddenly there were no bad guys. You look in the crowds, and especially in the families of Indian descent, you could see parents going for India, but their children were going for Australia. There were no bad guys. And we have that famous moment caught on camera where an Indian supporter proposed a wedding marriage live on TV in the middle of a match to an Australian supporter. And she said, yes, there were no bad guys in the cricket matches last year. Cricket was the winner. And it's the same with Mother Nature. In Mother Nature, there are no bad guys. Things just happen. Mother Nature is the winner. And so in Dinosaur versus the Asteroids, there are no bad guys. This is just something that happens. Mother Nature is the winner. In Grizzly Bear versus Salmon, there are no bad guys. It's just something that happens. Mother Nature is the winner. And so when we have coronavirus versus humans, there are no bad guys. This is just something that happens in Mother Nature. But something in us says, no, whoa, this was bad. The coronavirus was messed up. It forced us into an isolation lockdown. People lost their jobs. They lost their living. Children missed out on an education, and loved ones suffered and died. The coronavirus pandemic was messed up. It was more than something that just happened in Mother Nature. And so if we want to say it was messed up, we have to look beyond Mother Nature. We have to look to the Jesus story. The Jesus story is this: Jesus, the Son of God, becomes one of us. He becomes our species of life on this planet. And in the Bible reading that we just had from a section of the Bible called John 11, and it was very highlighted, it actually comes from a story where Jesus attends the funeral of his best friend Lazarus. And Jesus was deeply disturbed and troubled at this funeral. He wept, he cried, he mourned. And there are many stories in the Bible where Jesus is deeply disturbed when he sees disease, disabilities, and suffering. Jesus affirms our right to say, this was messed up. And then Jesus also got angry when he saw hypocrisy and oppression and bigotry. And Jesus himself suffered and died. The Bible says he was tortured. He suffered unfairly. He died. He was crucified. He died a slave's death on the cross. Before this happened, he prayed a prayer of agony, dripping sweats of blood. And as he hung to die on the cross, he cried out to God, why? And Jesus affirms our right to say, this is unfair. This hurts. This is disproportionate suffering. Why? Jesus affirms our right to say things are messed up. But we're left with more than just someone who cries out why. Because the second thing that Jesus gives us is this. The Jesus story gives us the hope that we're looking for. Now, if you've heard me before, you know that I used to love running. I used to run the City to Surf every year. I used to run the Sydney Half Marathon. I used to run the Sydney Marathon. And I ran it because it was empowering. It made me feel alive. Every year when I ran, my times got faster and faster. And there was this dynamic that no matter how little I trained, my times got better. But I hit a turning point in life where every year when I ran, my times got slower and slower. And no matter how much I trained, my times got worse. And the very last time I ran the Sydney Marathon, when it was all over, I fainted. I became unconscious. They had to take me to the medical tent. They had to put an IV drip up on me, put a litre of fluid in me to revive, to resuscitate me. So I had to ring up my wife and ask her to pick me up from the city because I couldn't get myself home. And as she's driving me home, she says, why? Why do you do these things? Because you're no good at them. And I thought, oh, ouch, like a dagger to your heart from your most loved one. But she was right. Why do I do these things when there is no hope of getting better? Because if all we have is Mother Nature, there is no hope of getting better. Because if all we have is Mother Nature, we all have bodies that will grow old, that will age, that will decay. If all we have is Mother Nature, every society, every civilization eventually disintegrates and implodes. If all we have is Mother Nature, this universe itself is destined, doomed to destruction. So where can we find hope from? And yet we live as if there's hope. We live as if there's more than just atoms and molecules. We live as if there's a moral story to this universe. Barack Obama famously quoted Martin Luther King when he said, "The arc of history bends towards justice," meaning there is a direction, a story behind this universe, a beginning, a middle, an end, and it's going to end in freedom, justice, and hope. And that's why we march and cry out for justice. This is why we call out oppressors and bullies. And this is why we try to make a difference, because we believe there is a story behind this universe. Well, where can this story come from? Well, according to the Christian tradition, it comes from the Jesus story, where there is a beginning, there is a middle, but there's a future hope. And in that verse that we just read in the Bible reading, Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." There is a future. There's more to this life than just what we can see and touch. There's a full, fulfilled, eternal life, both now and in the life to come. There is hope, and there is an arc to our story, and it does bend towards freedom, hope, justice, and mercy. So what do I do about this? Well, this brings me to the third reason that Jesus gives us the reboot we're looking for. The Jesus story gives us the personal reboot that we're looking for. When I was a kid, the number one, according to statistics, the number one takeaway roll was the Chico roll. But these days, the number one takeaway roll is a burrito. When I was a kid, the number one family car was the Holden Commodore. But these days, the number one best-selling family car is a Toyota Hilux. It's a pickup truck. When I was a kid, high schoolers listen to rock and roll. These days, high schoolers listen to hip hop. Society changes, and that's okay. But there's one other thing that's changed in society, and it's this. When I was a kid, the number one reason for seeing your family GP was the common cold. These days, the number one reason an Australian will see their family GP is for stress, anxiety, and depression. Mental health has hit epidemic highs, disproportionate highs, and it's hard to understand why it's so high, because you would think if you wanted to be born any time in human history, it would be right now in Australia. We're wealthier than ever before. We're healthier than ever before. We have free access to Wi-Fi in McDonald's. We're happier than ever before. And somehow we're more depressed, more stressed, more anxious than ever before. So what is going on? Well, some authors make some very good suggestions. This is Will Storr, a UK author, not a Christian. He's got a book called Selfie, How We Became So Self-Obsessed and What It's Doing to Us. He says in the Western world, we have this unchallenged mantra, and it goes like this. I'm okay, and you need to accept me for who I am. And it sounds like a great mantra. It's positive, it's empowering, but it's had the opposite effect, because what it's done, it's made us have to prove we're okay. It's created an unsustainable culture of self-perfectionism. John Ronson, UK writer, not a Christian, he's put out a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and he says it's more than this. We have returned to an age of tribalism, where our tribes set impossibly high standards of us, and now we have to moral virtue signal to prove our moral worth to our own tribe, and our tribe won't ever accept us. And we're always just one poorly worded tweet or comment away from being cut off, shunned, shamed, or cancelled. And if that happens, according to Douglas Murray, UK writer, not a Christian, in The Madness of Crowds, he says, there is no forgiveness. Your tribe will not forgive you. You will permanently, forever be shunned, cancelled, shamed, and cut off. And that's why Doug Murray says no one ever says sorry anymore. What is the point of saying sorry? Because they're not going to have you back. There is no forgiveness. So how can we find hope and the personal reboot we're looking for? Where in the Jesus story, Jesus becomes one of us. And the Jesus story is this: Jesus is perfect. So I don't have to pretend to be perfect. And it's okay not to be okay, because Jesus takes our place. He becomes what the Bible calls the scapegoat. He becomes the shunned, shamed, cancelled, cut off, rejected, unforgivable person in our place. But more than that, we swap places with Jesus. More than that, he rises from the dead and he empowers us. He fills us with his spirit. So every day we become more and more like Jesus. We belong to Team Jesus. We belong to a bigger story than just our own story, a story of freedom, mercy, justice, and hope. So what Jesus gives us is not just a reboot. The Bible calls it a rebirth. It's a resurrection hope. It's a new life hope. So do you remember our question today? It was this: how can I find the reboot I'm looking for? And I've said three things. Number one, Jesus affirms our right to say, you know what? This world is messed up. Things aren't how they should be. If all I have is Mother Nature, I have no right to say that. It's just Mother Nature. But the Jesus story gives us the right to say that. Then Jesus actually gives us the reboot that we're looking for, and he gives us the hope that we're looking for. When I drive to commute to work out west, out at Norwest and Castle Hill, I go this way. I go out west on the M4 towards Parramatta, But then I take the James Roos Drive exit that takes me towards Castle Hill, Norwest and Borkham Hills. And James Roos Drive is funny. When you come off the freeway, I think the speed limit is 70. And then it hits this zone where for a brief moment, it is 90k an hour. And everyone just guns it. You think, oh, wow, I can do 90 in city traffic. And everyone is just flying, trying to go as fast as they can. But then you just come around the corner and there's a red light and a 60 zone and gridlock traffic. You think, what is going on? Yet every day when you come off that freeway, you will go at 90, 90, 90. You'll tail the cars that are too slow. Get out the way. What are you doing? This is a 90 zone. But again, you hit gridlock just around the corner, a red light and a 60 zone. But every day you do it, they, whoa, let's go, go, go. This is 90, gridlock again. But every day they know today will be different. There'll be no traffic when I come around the corner, and gridlock, red light and a 60 zone. What is going on? What are they doing to us? And every year starts off the same. We say this year will be different. This year, I'm going to fix myself up. This year, I'm going to get my relationships in order. This year, work will be different. This year, my body, my health will be different. But every year is just the same. Why do we think this year will be any different from the previous year? But Jesus gives us that hope. Jesus gives us that reboot we're looking for, because Jesus says there is an arc to history. There is a story bigger than just our own story, and it has a direction, and we can be part of that story, part of Team Jesus, and enjoy a rebirth, not just a reboot, but a resurrection hope where we can belong to Team Jesus. And every day we can become more and more like Jesus and work towards his justice, mercy, freedom, and hope. Thanks. I'll hand you back to George and we'll have a time of question and answer after this.
Yeah, don't go too far, Sam. Okay, keep those questions coming in. We've got a few here. You talked of the word hope.
Sure.
What context are you using that? Are you using it as a certainty or a possible expectation, like, I hope I win the lottery?
Yeah. Well, I think we all know in English, hope is used both those ways, and they're both valid. So, we hope, not knowing for sure. So you hope to pass your exams. You hope that maybe this year will be different. But the Bible has that second sense as well. We have a future hope, and it's called a hope because it's in the future, but it's a certainty as well. It's the way I put it. I say, and maybe I mentioned this in a future talk. I think I do. So I'm going to give away a punchline here, I think. So in tennis, if you have a best of 5 and you win the first 3 sets, well, you don't play the final sets. But in cricket, oh my gosh, and we saw that in the Ashes, best of 5, you win the first 3, it's wrapped up, you still keep playing. You play as a winner. So you have a certain future hope of regaining the Ashes, even as you play the tests of 4 and 5, even though you don't know the outcome, but you have regained the Ashes. So that's the future certain hope that the Bible talks about.
Thank you, Sam. Right. Okay, the moral of the story seems to be that if you walk away from God, you need a new God, and that God is now the environment, humanism, science, and so on. All the has done, I don't know what that word is. Can you say what that word is?
Virus.
Oh, thank you. It's because you're a doctor, so you understand these things, and you understand.
This was written by a doctor, wasn't it?
Yeah. One of your mates. All the virus has done is highlight this situation. The answer to our dilemma must be a return to the one true God and not rely on ourselves for all the answers, i.e. reboot, rebirth, not brief back together, not build back better.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry.
So it's more a comment than a question. And I totally agree, because someone said, well, if we get rid of God, there's a vacuum and we have to replace God with something else, because we all live for something. I think there's a famous commencement speech by Foster Wallace or something. We all live for something, and that becomes our God. And cultural analysts have analyzed this, and it's fascinating. The reason why we're so polarized now, because people thought surely the pandemic would have united us around a common enemy, a common cause, but only divided us even more, polarized us even more. What is going on? And people have analyzed it. They said, once you take away God, everything else has to move up the ladder to replace God. And so politics, sports, and celebrities have had to fill that vacuum. And they've become not just God, but this has almost taken on a godlike, not just worship, but sins and self-righteousness. So now sports stars are being like Djokovic. He's just a tennis player, but he had to assume a role of moral responsibility like a politician, like a god. And so, what he did was not just this or that, but became like either moral virtue or a sin. So everything's had to be elevated. So I agree with that comment there. So we don't stop believing God. We replace God with other things that we worship or shun, cut out, shame, and we become even more morally self-righteous, or we call out sins even more.
Thank you, Sam. Billy Graham said, you have to be born again. How do you do that?
Yeah, and I think Billy...
I should tell you, my sister went back to India for that.
Wow.
And she didn't even take my mother. So I never really understood how she did it.
And Billy, of course, didn't invent that phrase. He got it from John chapter 3, where Jesus says you need to be born again. And for Billy's time, the 1950s or 70s, I think he did that because Australia was very churched in those days. Everyone had gone through Sunday school. Everyone probably had gone through school chapel services. So Billy was saying that to say, hey, it's more than just you've been to Sunday school. It's more than just you go to church every Sunday. You need to have had a personal conversion where you personally call Jesus your own Lord and Savior. You personally have decided to join Team Jesus. And there's also that spiritual, supernatural part of it. It's more than just a decision. As I've mentioned in the talk, there's a resurrection rebirth where Jesus' spirit lives in you, and there is a supernatural change. And you may not feel it, but I'll tell you something amazing. My boys are so short. Like, I actually took them to a pediatrician last year because I was so worried about how short they were going to be. And the pediatrician just said, well, basically they are in the bottom 1 percentile of the bell curve. So yes, they are short, but you also are in the bottom 1% of the bell curve. So they are not abnormally short. They are normally short. So I've actually been plotting their growth now, and I did not know, but they have been growing.
Stretching exercises,
so,
Sam?
Yeah, I feel like, but so to me, they still look short, but they are getting taller. And when the Spirit of Jesus lives in us, maybe we don't feel the changes, but the changes are happening.
One might say the ultimate reboot.
Yes.
Wow.
I like
not all in one go.
Yeah.
All right. Is not Christianity being cancelled by political correctness and several identity theories?
Wow. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes and no. So yes, definitely we can see how that's happening. But at the same time, I think Christianity, we can rise above the culture wars. I think there's a culture wars being played out here. And it's interesting that Jesus himself was able to transcend culture wars. So if you look at the people he used to hang around, he hung around the self-righteous religious Pharisees. So that's uber right-wing. And then somehow he hung out with tax collectors. So I guess they're your libertarians. And then he also hung out with what was labeled the sinners, people with shame. So maybe they belong on the other side of the spectrum. So somehow he was able to transcend culture wars and speak to everyone, no matter what their cultural beliefs or traditions were.
Yeah, I mean, he showed real authority, didn't he? I mean, he did that. We couldn't do that. All right. Doesn't society always change for the better? After all, it tells us that we are evolving and improving.
Yes. And we see that in the way the West has labeled its timeline. We had the classical period, the Romans and the Greeks. Then we had the Dark Ages. And then we had the Enlightenment, where we saw the light, 1600s onwards. So the way we've labeled that would say, hey, we're getting better and better and better. But someone has just said that's just Western moral arrogance. You know, that led to all the sins of imperialism and colonialism. And C.S. Lewis even calls it chronological snobbery, to think somehow we, of all generations, are the ones who have got it right, that we can see the light better than anyone else. I think Tim Keller best explained it, said every generation looks at the generation that came before it and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe they used to say that. They used to believe that. And that means someone else is always going to come along and replace us. And they can't believe we used to say that and believe that and do that. And so, yes, so two things. One, we may think we've got it, but someone else is always going to come along and replace us. But two, to say that things get better implies there is a moral story behind the universe. So when Barack Obama says the arc of justice bends towards justice, we want to believe him and we hope he's correct. But without the Jesus story, I'm arguing, you have no foundation for that hope. Because if all we have is Mother Nature, this is just one of many more events that just happens in a blip in the timeline of the universe.
Yeah, I think there's the real difference between hope and wishful thinking, isn't there?
Yeah. And, you know, Yuval Noah Harari, writer of Sapiens, Homo Deus, he says, you know, this whole story of progress is just a useful fictional story we've told ourselves. Useful, but fictional, because let's face it, it's just something that happens. So you can't make a value statement on what happens.
I think the writer of Ecclesiastes puts it this way, doesn't he? That there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
It's all been done before. Yeah, and we kid ourselves. Okay, one more. Do you think anxiety over COVID is justified? Does being Christian free you from all anxiety, including about COVID?
Oh, that is such a complex question. Peter Sandman, who's a risk analysis and advises governments on things like this, he's got such a good way of putting it. Anxiety is not a bad thing. There's this thing called the fear performance curve. Without anxiety, we will not study for exams. Like, anxiety makes us perform. Anxiety keeps us alive. Anxiety makes us put safety belts on. There's the anxiety of the heart. I'm getting this from Peter Sandman, and there's an anxiety of the head. So usually the head and the heart are out of sync. So usually your heart makes you afraid of things you should not be afraid of. So your heart says, oh, there's sharks. There are sharks here. But your head should tell you, come on. You know, the chances of dying in a shark attack are like a lightning strike. There are no sharks. It's okay. But so here you have what's called an irrational anxiety of sharks. But it can go the other way around. Your head tells you should be afraid of something, but your heart says, it's all right. So something like smoking and drinking are good examples of that. Like, I don't know how many deaths we have from cigarettes and alcohol per year, but our heads say, hey, we should smoke less, drink less. Our hearts go, it's all right. Do that tomorrow. Wait till dry July or something like that. So there you have an irrational calm, according to Peter Sandman. But in a pandemic, it flips. Your head says, I think we should be afraid. There's a virus out there. But your heart says, listen, you don't want to appear too anxious. And so here it's all flipped. And so anxiety comes from the mismatch from what your head and your heart tells you. And the problem with pandemics, they come once a century, n equals 1 or n equals 0. There is no playbook. We can never say, 10 years ago we did this. No, there was no 10 years ago when we did this. So I think the anxiety is warranted, it's justified, and it's understandable.
Thank you, Sam. We've probably got time for one more question. Thank you, George.
Thanks.
Thanks, man. As a Christian, is there only rebirth in one's life, but many reboots? Sorry, is there only one rebirth in one's life, but many reboots in the course of life and development? How does this make us believe Jesus is always the person to make us a rebirth in spirit? What about its desire or pursuit of wealth is also a stimulus for reboots? What about its desire or pursuit of wealth? So is the pursuit of wealth a stimulus for a reboot.
Sure. All right. Yeah, I
If
just
got that
remember.
right.
Remember, I didn't answer the last question very well. There was a second half, but okay. Well,
I reckon you did okay. Yeah.
I think, yeah, without Jesus, we only have three choices. No one is in control of this universe, or I have to control everything. But with the Jesus story, no, there's a God who controls what he controls, and I just be responsible for what I can be responsible for. So that helps us manage our anxieties. Is there one reboot or multiple reboots? The Bible is very good. It uses how when we decide to be a Christian, join Team Jesus, that's a status we're given immediately. The reboot happens, but then there's a lifelong journey where there will be ups and downs. So maybe a lot of mini reboots that happen along the way. In the Christian tradition, we have this great phrase called spiritual formation, where we start to create good habits. And so I heard this fantastic podcast. It said there's three ways of looking at Christian growth. One, it's all about information. I need more information. And there's a time and place for that. But information alone does not change us. That's why warning labels on cigarette packets don't stop us smoking. Information alone. Some people then say, well, I need experience. I need the emotions. And yes, there's a time and place for that. But this, in the end, by itself, it's shallow and unsustainable. So what we need is to create good habits. And that's why it's called discipleship. It's all about discipline. And this person gave the example, if I want to run a marathon tomorrow, I couldn't do it. No matter how much willpower, how much information, how much emotion I had, you could not do it. But if you create the discipline where every day you run bit by bit, more and more, anyone can run a marathon. And the Christian journey is one of creating good habits, of disciplines. And so bit by bit, your heart has correct desires. And the money thing, money by itself is not a bad thing. Like all things, friendship, everything's a good gift from a good God to enjoy in and of itself. It's what your heart thinks of it. So for some people, it's going to represent security. So it becomes their God. It replaces God for security. For some people, it becomes their identity and status. And so it becomes their God and it consumes them. But if we just see it as a good gift from a good God to enjoy, to be generous with, then it may not be a bad thing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you, George.
Let's thank Sam. We will be back on the 17th of February. Now, our format this term is that we're having these talks on a fortnightly basis. So we'll be meeting again on the 17th of February, and Sam is going to talk about how to find freedom from anxiety. So we had a taste of what he might be saying today, but I'm looking forward to hearing what he's really got to say about that topic. Now, the engine room of our ministry is our small group ministry. And we have a number of what we call hope groups, which meet on each alternate Thursday. And whether you're a mature Christian or whether you're someone who's just inquiring, hope groups are tailored for your needs. That hope groups are tailored or provide you with an opportunity to ask questions, to engage and to really grow in Christ. When we talked about growing before, we want to grow, we want to be more like him. So on the outline and on the chat function, there is a QR code for our feedback. So if you'd like to join a hope group, or if you'd like to meet one-on-one with somebody and talk about the Bible, to find out more about what God has to say about your life, then can I encourage you to use the QR code, get in touch. Someone will come back to you and we'll talk to you in more detail about our hope groups. Our hope groups will be meeting next Thursday at Atrio Cafe, which is at 85 Castlereagh Street. But that's it for us today. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you all in a fortnight. Thank you.